Hi, my name is Kim Hyung-sun. I am a Korean Christian writer. I've been writing my own books on Jesus for about 20 long years up until now, especially on the credibility of the resurrection of Jesus. I published my first book on Jesus in 2012. The title of my first book was Humanity of Jesus and His Resurrection. When I say humanity, it refers to a person as a whole, and it means more than personality traits. To me, the word humanity has a more comprehensive meaning as a human being, including personality trait of individual specifically, but at the same time interchangeable with each other. So I am going to use two words at the same time. I won't make a clear distinction between the two words when I say it. Even if the meaning is clearly distinguished by the usage of the two words, the word humanity has much more comprehensive meaning. But the range of the meaning of each word may be somewhat different. At the same time, I do not think that using two words simultaneously without distinguishing between them will cause much confusion among the readers. I may not exactly know in what context do people from English-speaking countries use the word humanity. The same is true for other verbs and nouns for that matter. Basic lexical meaning of it, of course, I know, but all the nouns and verbs of each language has a certain context in which the meaning of the word changes. Sometimes it is subtle, and sometimes it has a completely different meaning. Therefore, when I speak English, I may not be able to speak the way most native speakers from most English-speaking countries speak. Sometimes it is difficult for me to say even the most simple English words and sentences. Even if the lexical meaning of it is the same, sometimes the range of meaning of the word can make huge difference. Anyway, let me first explain why I named the title of my first book that way. I have a good reason for this. I realized that in the character of Jesus, or personality, or humanity, I can clearly see his love and eagerness and willingness to help others who are in need and show deep concern for them. It seems that his first priority was to help others and consider the safety of those people who were close to him, especially those who came to him for healing of their own loved ones, both physically and spiritually. I will deal with the contents of my book on Jesus in detail later. But first, let me introduce myself and why I decided to start YouTube broadcast and about English as a language. The reason why I want to discuss English first is like this. Because of cultural and linguistic differences, Asians may think that Jesus is a more arrogant person than Westerners usually think about him. Early 20s, I studied mathematics, and at the age of 30, I studied English literature, and shortly after graduation, I studied psychology. All of them are undergraduate courses. Though one of my major was English literature, I learned English as a foreigner, and I have never lived in an English-speaking country. Therefore, I can still make mistakes while speaking English, especially how to choose tenses and aspects of the verbs and how to use prepositions. I still can make mistakes. In all languages, each verb with a similar meaning also has its own similar usage. However, the range of the meaning of each verb is different from each other. So when I say certain verbs while speaking English, I may use a verb that is not the best choice for the native speakers of any other English-speaking country. Please consider that fact, and please understand, if the expressions of what I said in this video clip are somewhat impolite or absurd for you to hear. Before saying any further, I realize that the reason English is a difficult language for me to learn is not because English itself is a specifically difficult language than any other languages around the world. Quite the contrary, it may sound strange, but the difficulty levels of all languages are well distributed. So if you pick up random samples of each age group who are already speaking their own native language fluently, you can easily recognize that those people who belong to the similar age groups can speak their own native language fluently if you classify them according to their age, children, adolescent, and adult levels. Each age group has its own language performance level, and most people belong to the average level of each age group. But for those people who are already familiar with the native language of their own, for them, it is a somewhat difficult task to learn a foreign language, especially if a foreign language is a branch of a totally different language family. Means that they didn't belong to the same language family. For me, English was that language. Because of that, when I was studying English literature in college, I realized that I couldn't speak as much as I knew. That was the moment I realized that English was just the accumulated knowledge I studied for more than 30 years of my life up until then. But I didn't develop English as a language, speaking for myself and understanding others during a conversation. I could only read English reading comprehension texts and remember the whole content until I found the correct answer to the English test. My purpose was to find the right answer on the English test, not to have a casual conversation with someone else. After I changed the way I used to study English in the past, what I meant to say is a more empirical or experiential approach than learning the grammatical elements of each word in a sentence. I could clearly see the difference between Korean and English. We don't use personal pronouns as much as native speakers usually do when they speak English. Unlike Westerners, when we talk to each other as Koreans, if you mention too many personal pronouns in a sentence, others may think you are somewhat arrogant or immature person like a child. Because when we talk to each other, we think that the subject and object are relatively obvious information, so you don't have to constantly use personal pronouns to refer to others. Therefore, if you repeatedly mention obvious information during a conversation, we accept this type of conversation differently. For example, if you are talking to someone and they keep referring to you or someone else with personal pronouns he, she, and you, sometimes that means the person you are talking to is trying to hold you accountable for something wrong or other person whom they are referring to as a pronoun, as he or she. It is blaming you or the other person they are referring to, thinking that it is your fault or that person is responsible for the mistakes. And sometimes referring to someone with a personal pronoun repeatedly has the following meanings. Just right before someone wants to pick a fight with you, that person will say to you, you, again and again. Or when someone wants to have a serious talk with you, that person can say to you a personal pronoun you constantly. When you are talking to a close friend, it's not a problem at all to refer to you as a personal pronoun once or twice. But if a stranger you met for the first time or someone who wasn't your best friend continue to refer to you with pronouns while talking to you, it has a strong meaning of criticizing you or criticizing the person whom they refer to with personal pronouns. It's somewhat disdainful remarks against you. So referring to someone by a personal pronoun again and again during a conversation, in our culture, it means to hold the person responsible for something wrong. Most Koreans would accept it that way. In our culture, the use of such personal pronouns is always viewed negatively. That's why Koreans have a hard time learning Western languages. We are extremely reluctant to use personal pronouns when we talk to Westerners, not because of grammatical reasons, but because of the cultural perception that it is rude to use personal pronouns. So in order to speak English or any other Western languages, I realized that I have to mention subjective and objective personal pronoun quite a lot habitually. It's not a rude or impolite way of speaking. It merely refers to the subject and object in the sentence, the identity of the person whom I am talking to right now. It is just indicating which person I am referring to. That also means anyone from a Western country or any other countries that often use personal pronoun habitually as a way of speaking to indicate the identity of subject and object and strictly follow the rule of agreement of each grammatical components in the sentences, they should know these kinds of various differences in order not to make any mistakes. It may be somewhat difficult for them to avoid using pronouns in conversations with others. If it is not necessary, we do not use pronouns at all. Almost zero, once or twice is enough, but not every sentence. There is another thing you should consider. When it comes to the agreement between nouns and numbers, for those people who speak English have to think about the agreement of numbers in nouns in every sentence. But we don't have to think about the agreement that much. But there was a strict rule of the number agreement in Western languages. If a certain number is mentioned before a noun, if it is a plural number, then the following noun also has to be the plural one. So plural suffix s has to be attached to the end of the noun. That is the number agreement. But in our culture, the noun that follows the number, which is plural, doesn't have to be always plural, because the number itself already indicates the noun that follows it is plural. So from our point of view, put the plural suffix at the end of the noun is somewhat redundancy. So we don't consider that much a strict rule of the number agreement while talking to Westerners. Of course, that doesn't mean that we don't use plural nouns at all. When we mention many or any plural numbers, then the nouns that follows it have a plural suffix at the end of it. but it is not always an absolute grammatical rule like in English. Because of that, it may be somewhat annoying for Western professors. While talking with Korean students, even such an easy grammatical element, so easy, even children from English or any other Western language speaking country don't make those kinds of basic mistakes at all when it comes to the number agreement. But why Korean students keep on making mistakes? Even educated person can make those simple mistakes. We have to understand each other. And there are some things that you should know about using articles. The concept of an article is not a familiar grammatical element for us to use, especially when it comes to the definite article usage. We don't specifically use the definite article for each noun in most cases. When we use the definite article before a noun, its meaning is mostly demonstrative pronouns. There are no such articles in Korean that have the same function as definite articles in English, sometimes indicating generic meaning of nouns or sometimes indicating extended family members of a person's name like that. When we refer to a noun, if there was no specific reason to mention some important information concerning the nouns, we simply mention nouns only without any specific articles before them. Likewise, in our language, there is no distinction between many and much. Many lions, many informations, many evidences. We can say it in this way in Korean. Countable, uncountable doesn't matter. However, in English, distinctions for many, much exists. For example, the lion is a countable noun. Because of that, many lions is the right expression, but information is an uncountable noun. Because of that, much information, no plural suffix s at the end of the noun, much evidence, much furniture. There is a clear distinction between two words. Such a distinction is important in English, but not in Korean. The distinction is not that important. As I mentioned earlier, one of the subjects I majored in at university was English literature. If you consider the fact, I should be speaking English fluently like native speakers by now. But unfortunately, I still can't do that. Not because of my lack of ability, but because of the basic grammatical structure of the two languages is different. The way of two languages understood and expressed is fundamentally different. So please understand if I make such a mistake. The reason I mention the grammatical differences between these two languages is to understand what Jesus said about himself, especially about his identity. To understand the overall conversation he had when he described himself, we need to know about grammatical differences. And another reason is that I misunderstood Jesus in the past. I read the Gospel of John for the first time when I was a middle school student. Whenever Jesus spoke about his identity, he mentioned personal pronouns quite a lot. Because of his speech habits, I thought that Jesus was a little arrogant person for a very long time. But at the same time, whenever I read the Gospel of John, I felt as if I was standing behind Jesus or right next to him. I felt more close to him. I will analyze the reason in more detail in the next video. Anyway, after reading Jesus' conversation in the Gospel of John, I couldn't understand why he spoke in such a way. Nowadays, there are those who argue that Jesus is not the Son of Man, because whenever he referred to himself as the Son of Man, he used the third-person singular pronoun. He said it as if he was not referring to himself. It was as if he was referring to someone else as the Son of Man. However, in all the Gospels, when Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man, the disciples acknowledged that Jesus was referring to himself. I also believe that way. Even if he used the third-person singular pronoun, I believe that the Son of Man was Jesus. In fact, I never had any doubts on that issue. That was how he described his identity. But at the same time, what confused me was that he called himself by his own name, as if he were a different person. In the Gospel of John, when he said, "And this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." What confused me was whether someone else had called on the name of Jesus in the place, or did Jesus refer to himself? Whether someone else in the same place called Jesus, or whether the Gospel writer called him that way on behalf of the reader. I wonder why Jesus spoke his name in front of his disciples as if he were referring to someone else. When I was young, I was confused because of that, and at the same time curious about that. We don't say our names in conversations with people close to us, except for the occasion of introducing myself. I don't call my name Kim Hyung-soon, an author, while talking to others. We don't talk in this way when we talk to people close to us, unless we are trying to introduce ourselves to strangers. It confused me, and perhaps for the same reason, skeptics also raise such questions about his identity. Skeptics sometimes argue that it was not Jesus himself, but the Gospel writers called Jesus the Son of Man and the Son, meaning the Son of God, especially in his conversation with Nicodemus. But that is not true. Jesus habitually refers to himself in the third person. It was his speech habit. I will analyze that issue later. After studying biblical Hebrew and Greek, I understood why so many personal pronouns were used in the Gospels. In the biblical Hebrew grammar, in almost all verb conjugation except participles, the personal pronoun is expressed in the form of a prefix or suffix. Therefore, it is not an awkward sentence for them to use personal pronouns repeatedly during a conversation. It was not an arrogant or rude way of talking. It looks like that way from the perspective of Asians, some an arrogant attitude or impolite way of saying it. But it's not. It is just their way of expressing themselves. Due to these linguistic and cultural differences, it can be misleading that Jesus may seem more arrogant and self-obsessed person to Asians. Most people believe that religious people should admit their faults and mistakes. That is the attitude of humbleness and humility. But Jesus definitely does not belong to this category. Whenever he talks to others, he refers to himself in the third or first person, changing the personal pronouns intentionally, confusing others deliberately. Because of this type of conversation, people misunderstood him as an arrogant person or a crazy person. To Asians, this type of conversation made Jesus look more arrogant person than the Westerners' point of view. The important fact is that the real conversation between Jesus and the Jewish people still remains up until today, and the topic of the controversy at the time is still the subject of controversy among the modern-day scholars. Then we can assume that the core center of controversy concerned about the identity of Jesus was a real issue back then, since those kinds of fierce debate I never saw in the contemporary myth. That part of the debate was not inspired from any myth of that time. That's why I began to compare the conversation between Jesus and those who close to him and analyze carefully. I will post more about it in the next video. Thank you for watching.